First, Julia didn't pay any attention to it. Small things would disappear on their own: a spoon, keys, a hair clip. She'd look for them, grumble at her own absent-mindedness, and a few days later she'd find them where she'd already looked. Then larger things started disappearing. The book she'd definitely left on the nightstand turned up in the bathroom. The shoe that had been by the door suddenly turned up in the closet. One morning, she couldn't find her phone and found it in the refrigerator. She tried to attribute it to fatigue, stress, but the feeling of anxiety grew. One night, she heard the floor creak, faint, cautious, as if someone was sneaking around the apartment. She held her breath, clenching her fingers on the blanket. For long seconds, there was absolute silence. Perhaps she'd just imagined it, but the next morning, her wallet was gone. Then Julia decided to check the security cameras. She connected her phone to her home surveillance system, rewound the footage, scrolling through hours of boring footage, and then she froze. In the middle of the night, when she was already asleep, there was movement on the footage. A faint, almost imperceptible shadow passed along the hallway. The figure was too blurry to make out details, but it was definitely there. Someone was in her house. But the door and windows were locked. Julia couldn't stop thinking about that figure. She watched the footage over and over, hoping to find an explanation, maybe a glare, a camera error. But the more she watched, the more she realized it was a person. But who? The doors were locked, the windows too. The cameras showed no entry or exit. So he hadn't come. He had already been here. She began to notice little things. A quiet rustling in another room when she was alone. The feeling that someone was watching her, even when no one was around. A strange smell in the air, faint, indistinguishable, but alien. At first she chalked it up to nerves, but then the real weirdness began. One morning she came out of the bathroom and saw that the chair in the living room had been moved. Another time she found 2 cups on the table, even though she always drank coffee alone. And then one night she woke up to a breath in her ear. A barely audible inhale, warm, slow. She froze. "Who's there?" Her voice wavered. Silence. But someone's presence was felt in the darkness, like pressure in the air. Julia turned on the nightlight. The room was empty, but the bed next to her felt warm, as if someone had just gotten up from it. In that moment she understood. She was not alone here. She never had been. Julia could no longer deny the truth. Someone lived in her apartment, not a burglar, not a stranger who snuck in at night. A neighbor, whom she had never seen, but who was always here. She tried to resist. She left the lights on, stayed up at night, talked to friends, pretended that everything was normal. But the neighbor didn't like her behavior. She heard his footsteps in the dark. She felt her things moving on their own. One morning there was a sign in the bathroom mirror, in her own handwriting, "Don't fight," and she broke. Julia never left the house again. She didn't answer the phone. She stopped talking. She didn't resist anymore. The neighbor was happy. Now he could take her place. When her friends came to visit, the door was open. There was no one in the apartment. Clothes, things, everything was in place, but Julia didn't exist. And on the camera, the last recording showed something blurry getting out of bed, walking up to the camera and turning off the light. And at night, a shadow moved in the apartment. It was blurry, thin, almost invisible. And sometimes, if you peered into the darkness for a long time, you could hear a quiet whisper, like an echo of the past, like the voice of someone who once lived here, but now he was a shadow, and another had taken his place.